Hey everyone, welcome to the third video in this series dealing with the Millennium and the interpretation of Revelation chapter 20. In the last video, we saw how the book of Revelation is organized as 7 parallel visions, each of which begins at the start of the Christian era and ends with the final day of judgment and the consummation of Christ's kingdom. So, if this is a correct understanding of the structure of the book of Revelation, then in some fashion Satan was bound during the ministry of Jesus at the beginning of the Christian era. And if that is true, then we should certainly find other evidence in the Gospels, right? Well, let's take a look and see if such evidence exists. In Matthew 12, the Pharisees accused Jesus of having a demon and casting out demons by the power of the devil. Jesus responds by pointing out that the contrary is true. That he was casting out demons shows that Satan has been bound. How can one enter a strong man's house, Jesus says, and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man? Then indeed the house can be plundered. Matthew 12:29. The Greek word translated tying up is deo, which means to bind, to fasten with chains, to throw into chains. It is the same word that John used in the book of Revelation to describe the angel that binds Satan with a great chain in Revelation 20, verse 1. In another passage, Jesus sends 70 disciples to preach the gospel. They return reporting that in Jesus' name, even the demons submit to us. Luke chapter 10, verse 17. When Jesus heard this, he said, "I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning." In some sense, in the spirit dimension, Satan was cast from heaven and fell to the earth. So abrupt and so violent was his fall that Jesus compares it to a bolt of lightning that strikes the earth. This occurred during the ministry of Jesus. Referring to his imminent death on the cross, Jesus says, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." John 12, verses 31 and 32. The phrase translated driven out is a derivative of the same root word that John used when he described the angel who seized the dragon and threw him into the pit. Perhaps the most compelling evidence that Satan has been bound and thrown out occurs in the Apocalypse itself. Chapter 12 relates a symbolic account of a great battle that occurred in heaven during the ministry of Jesus. This is in Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 9. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. And he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Why do I say this occurred during the ministry of Jesus? Because the passage is narrating the gospel account in symbolic imagery. We have the birth of the child who was pursued by the dragon who wanted to devour him. But God protects the child by taking him into the wilderness, a reference to the flight to Egypt. The child is later caught up to God and to his throne, a reference to the ascension. This chart compares Revelation 12 with Revelation 20. In Revelation 12, we have the great red dragon, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. In Revelation 20, the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan. Almost identical phraseology. In Revelation 12, the devil was thrown down to the earth. In Revelation 20, the angel threw him into the pit. In Revelation 12, Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. In chapter 20, the angel coming down from heaven seized the dragon. In chapter 12, I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah." In chapter 20, they came to life and reigned with him 1,000 years. In chapter 12, the accuser of our comrades has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. In chapter 20, that he would deceive the nations no more until the 1,000 years. But how can we say Satan has been bound when we continue to see evidence of his activity in the world? Doesn't Peter himself tell us that Satan prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour in 1 Peter 5:8? According to the text itself, Satan is bound in a particular sense, so he can no longer deceive the nations. He continues to deceive individuals as they allow themselves to be carried away by his lies. He continues prowling about seeking whoever he can devour. But wherever and whenever the church preaches the gospel with faithfulness, he cannot deceive everyone. There will always be those who receive Christ, whose eyes will be opened to the truth of God. Wherever we preach the gospel with faithfulness and persistence, the church will experience great triumphs, for the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Before Jesus came, Satan had power to deceive entire nations. The only nation in the world that did not live in absolute ignorance of the truth of God was Israel. All other nations lived without hope and without God in the world. All this has changed with the resurrection of Jesus. Now all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him, and he now commands us to go and make disciples of all the nations. Whenever the church obeys this command to proclaim the good news of Christ to all parts of the world, Satan is bound. He cannot deceive the nations like he used to. What does this mean on a practical level? This should give Christians confidence and courage, knowing that we have in our possession a powerful weapon in the gospel of Christ. No matter how strong is the national resistance to Christianity, if we are faithful in sharing that message with others, people will come to Christ. Life will change, and Satan will be unable to deceive entire nations.